Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Angie Judge from Dexibit as your host for today's special webinar on Tales from the Other Side, lifting our thoughts from lockdown as we begin contemplating what reopening looks like. Many visitor attractions in Asia, including those in mainland China and Hong Kong, South Korea and Japan, have already gone through their initial lockdown period and they are beginning to reopen. Though that has also thrown some of those countries back into their first of what could be many rolling shutdowns to follow as cases rise again. Today, getting this unique perspective from those further ahead on their journey than us provides us with the opportunity to see into our own future. Asia is a particularly useful region to do this with because not only have they had quite a rapid reopening comparatively to what we might expect in other regions of the world, they also have the unique experience that COVID-19 isn't their first rodeo in terms of contagion, with SARS in 02 and H1N1 in 09. So there's the potential for us to borrow practices for common operational policies and procedures that Asia uses in its public spaces. I think whenever we take advice from others in the market, we do need to note the differences in cultures and economies and the political landscapes. And there are many here. So today's comments are offered up as, I'm sure, many sources we will all consult in understanding what the future might look like with that lens. We do note too that as it is for the rest of the world, this is still very early days in this pandemic, even though this region is definitely ahead of us in the curve. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by June Ko, Vice President for IAAPA in Asia Pacific, joining us from Hong Kong, who has been leading the industry in the wider Asia region through the COVID-19 crisis since the beginning of the year. We're also joined by Oliver Cully, who's the CEO of Scallywag Entertainments, who works with a lot of attractions across the region, previously with Merlin, the owners of Legoland, Madame Tussauds, Sea Life and more. And Alan Mahony joins us from mainland China at Atlantis, which is an island resort with a mixed-use attractions complex, including an aquarium and a water park hosting 500,000 visitors annually. Rob Smith sends his apologies as he is unable to join us today, and a huge thank you to Oliver and Alan for stepping in to join us. On our agenda, we are going to look at the months since COVID-19 unfolded in Asia to provide us with a bit of context for how the region has responded, and then we'll dive into visitation trends, into ramp up operational measures, sentiment and outlook. We welcome everyone to say hello or contribute to the commentary by using the setting of all speakers and attendees for the public discussion on the chat, and please feel welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A facility. We'll try and get through as many of those as we can during the latter parts of today's session. It is being recorded and we will distribute that recording after the presentation. Over to you, June, to take us into an introduction.
Thank you, Angie. For those that don't know about IAAPA or don't know about us, I just want to touch on a little bit of a background about IAAPA. IAAPA is the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. Alan is actually one of our members at Atlantis, and we're more than 100 years old. Around the world, we have more than 6,000 corporate members, and our members generally cover the facility members, so locations such as Alan's at Atlantis, and manufacturers and suppliers, students and consultants. So with more than 700 members in the Asia Pacific region, our region has really been taking the lead in growing in the last few years. Our offices are located in Alexandria, Orlando, Brussels, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Mexico, so we're very well covered around the world. You'll find someone in IAAPA working for you at any hour of the day, really. And a lot of our resources and member resources we have on the COVID-19 situation and to support some of the industry is on IAAPA.org, IAAPA.org. And a lot of that information currently is free for members and non-members, understanding the situation that we're all in and to be supportive to our industry. Now, as we kind of look through the slide and look through the situations that we have in Asia, obviously China being quite a large portion of our economy here in Asia Pacific, we've seen China really start off with, obviously kicking off with a lot of cases of COVID-19 in the Wuhan area. And then slowly we've seen a lot of different kinds of areas being locked down. So since Chinese New Year, and I remember this quite vividly, right on the eve of Chinese New Year, excuse me, I was on conference calls with a lot of my US colleagues and colleagues around the world, trying to just guide what we should do and what will happen. And so we all do understand and know the kind of difficulties that everyone is going through. And obviously we cannot say we're experts, but we're definitely looking towards the future and looking at how reopening happens, especially for the attractions industry. A lot of the attractions in China had shut down early February. And right now, we do see a lot of those lockdowns already lifted. A couple of weeks ago, the transportation system all throughout China had reopened. So a lot of the train system that really connects all of the different cities within China had reopened. And we're looking at a lot of mobility right now within China. And just with our office in Shanghai, we've also seen videos from our Shanghai office showing us the number of people going into the train systems and going into the underground transport systems, and really being out and about right now for the last couple of weeks. So we could say that China really is on its path to reopening a lot of its attractions, malls, and other public spaces. But they are doing it step by step and in different kind of stages. And during the earlier times, a lot of different measures were put in place, such as putting a QR code on people that were moving, having mobility within those different cities to understand whether that person was healthy or not healthy. You needed to have a QR code whether you were a foreigner or not, to be able to have that mobility and the access to that transportation. And I would say being an Asian myself, although I've lived a lot of my years in North America, in Toronto, as well as in Sydney, in Australia, I would say in the last 20 years that I've been here in Hong Kong, you can really see that the culture and the way we face the COVID-19 situation is a little bit different, especially since China and Hong Kong has had experience with SARS in 2003. So jumping over to Hong Kong, you'll see that we have had a more milder shutdown. Our shutdown never really included a full lockdown. Our malls and our shops and everything still remained open even until today. The only restrictions really that were very harshly put in place were the travel restrictions. As soon as we saw that there were quite a few different cases around the world and spreading around the world, the Hong Kong government decided to close some of the travel borders to foreigners, and they restricted the travel between foreign countries. And when we talk about foreign countries, it's every country that's not Hong Kong, China, or Taiwan. So how has life been really like in Hong Kong with everything not really closed? I would say we are quite comfortable to move around, but all of us generally have been wearing masks ever since end of January. And this is really to protect ourselves and others, because we do understand that a lot of those cases might not have any symptoms, and sometimes we might not even notice if we may be sick. So we have had a lot of different precautionary measures that I think from the SARS period really flowed through up to today, where our elevators are very well sanitized. We have automatic sanitizers, dispensers right outside elevators or in malls and in enclosed areas. And from further in to our office, in the IAAPA office in Hong Kong, we have been working in two different teams and kind of been working in tandem, trying not to cross-contaminate everyone, and also be able to carry on with our work because actually for associations, it's busier during this time than in our normal day work. So the cases in Hong Kong, I would say, are quite stable at the moment, because we're looking at, I think, the 12th day where we are going to have the less than 10 cases, so a single digit on cases. And I'm touching my table here is made of wood, hoping that it will continue this way and lessen as we go along. When we look at the attractions in Hong Kong, a lot of them have been closed since early February and have not yet reopened, and do not have yet a time when they can reopen. So when we look at Japan, Singapore, and South Korea and Southeast Asia, some of these areas also had really restrictions on how they will reopen attractions, and especially as we see more cases in Singapore at the moment. So I would say the only place that really kept their locations open was South Korea. All of their attractions have kept open, and they're at capacity of about 50% at the moment. So that's pretty much, sorry to rush through a little bit on the other countries, but because a lot of the other countries really are looking at the similar situation of not yet knowing the reopen date. So the only special one that I really wanted to point out was South Korea. Thank you. Angie.
Thank you so much, June. I know your team have been doing such amazing hard work since this thing started right at the very beginning, and the industry is incredibly grateful for that. If we move on to the next slide, we'll come into and talk to Ollie about what's happening in visitation trends. Ollie, I know this very famous picture has been doing the rounds in the media. This is the Hongshong Mountain Park, an outdoor tourist attraction in mainland China. It's showing very packed visitation, and in fact accompanied by a caption that the crowds exceeded their visitor limit of 20,000 capacity. Does this reflect the reality on the ground for attractions, and what sort of trends are you seeing in the market that might help us set our own expectations?
Thanks, Angie. So look, starting with mainland China, I think in general, I'd say the answer is no, unfortunately. The picture is somewhat bizarre, but I actually understand that it's normally a ticketed walk, and was made free for that particular day, so it was very busy. So people still like a bargain, but look, more generally across the mainland China, there are still some attractions that are closed. Shanghai is taking a very conservative approach, and many attractions in Shanghai are still closed. Of course, Wuhan, attractions there are mostly still closed. And in locations where they are open, particularly, well, all attractions, but indoor attractions in particular, are seeing really low digit numbers in terms of visitation. So I think from most of the general managers and attraction leaders that I've been speaking to, you know, they're telling me that their visitation is somewhere between 10 to 30% of normal, and most of them, to be honest, closer to the sort of 10 to 15 mark. So really, visitation is at the very early stages of recovery. There's this picture. You know, I've not seen any other photos of very busy tourist attractions like this one. There may have been some cases. I would guess that they would probably be more outdoor locations. I think the indoor attractions will possibly recover slightly later than the outdoor ones, from some of the research I've read as well, interviewing people about their perception and travel intentions and so on. They tend to be slightly more leaning towards the outdoor experiences, at least at this initial stage. So look, that's China. I mean, some of the attractions with the biggest footprints in China in terms of number of locations, which are some of the local companies like Molly Fantasy, which is actually owned by Aeon, Japanese Aeon, and Miland, which is a Chinese-owned company. They're sort of themed arcades, effectively, but they have very large footprints. As of a week ago, which is when the latest data was shared, I think Molly Fantasy only had around 48 of 156 of their attractions open around China, around mainland China. So it's been a week since their last data, so maybe they're closing in on 100 now. I'm not 100% sure, but it does show you that you know, it's going to take time. It's definitely not a case of everything is now open and up and running. Moving to the rest of Asia, as you mentioned, June, South Korea is somewhat of a bright spot in Asia. That's really good. I know that some of those attractions are seeing some reasonable visitor numbers, and that's positive. I don't think they're breaking any records by any means. In fact, I'm sure they're down on last year, but they're still getting reasonable numbers. You know, hundreds of people coming every day, which is positive. Most other countries, though, across the Asia-Pacific region, attractions closed. Southeast Asia, nearly all closed. Japan and Australia, New Zealand, nearly all closed. So overall, I would say we're really at the very early stages of reopening in this region. And the attractions that have reopened are seeing very low numbers to start with. And we obviously hope that those will climb steadily. But in terms of the sort of shape of the recovery for visitor attractions, it's looking more to be a U shape as opposed to a V shape for mainland China and the countries that have managed to reopen attractions so far.
Thank you, Oliver. And Ellen, is it a similar experience to what you're seeing?
Alan,
you might need to unmute yourself.
Okay, got it now. Okay, yeah, it's been very interesting going through the whole procedure that's gone through here. As it was mentioned before, it started from Wuhan, and it was hit at a very difficult time because it was the start of the Chinese New Year holiday, which is our peak period of the year. So we were geared up with our part-time staff on for the time. We had 3,000 staff ready to go. And we are integrated resorts, so we have a hotel room with 1,318 rooms that was fully booked. We have a water park, we have an aquarium, and we also have a dolphin interactive plan. So basically on the 22nd, we started to have word come out, and the issue was because it was Chinese New Year, the Wuhan people were traveling. So it started to spread. So 4 days later, on looking at the situation and dealing with the government, we closed our attractions, but the hotel opened and the hotel never closed. Our biggest issue at this time was tracking any Wuhan people and people who were contagious. They went to hospitals, and basically we had to then look at any staff who was connected, exactly their movement. So within our biggest priority then was one, to keep our guests safe. So there was a lot of taking temperatures, a lot of checks throughout the place. Then most important, we went into our staff. So basically here in China, all of your staff live in a dormitory. So we have about 3,000 people living in one space, a dormitory space where we rent apartments. And we had to look at setting up quarantine areas and putting staff into quarantine. So that period moved forward. We had to control our staff. They could not leave that area. The only way they could leave was to come to work, which they had to do on set buses. And again, we had to put a lot of procedures into place, again, for the safety of our staff, plus the safety of our guests during that period. It was really a lockdown period for a good solid month. Any people who came into Hainan, now Sanya is part of Hainan Island, which is an island. So compared to any other province in China, mainland China, we're lucky here that we could control who was coming in and out. But anyone who came in, including mainland visitors, had to do 2 weeks quarantine. Now, what you saw was the 2 weeks quarantine period was stopped for people from mainland China. So what we started to see, we saw people coming back into Hainan, and there was quite a good pickup come in at the time, because people believe that Hainan, being down south, being a warm climate, being fresh air, it was good to get out. So what we found was a lot of people were coming, and we still were getting, the hotel was probably sitting at about 25 to 30% of people getting out of Shanghai and various cities to just get away. We didn't have attractions open. We still had a lot of regulations on people here. We didn't have all restaurants open. We have 21 different facilities for dining, but we only had 4 open at the time. So we controlled everything. Then it got to the stage that we slowly worked with the government, and it got to the stage that we could open up our attractions. Now, our first attraction we opened up was the aquarium, which is an indoor attraction, and we opened that up about 5.5 weeks after closing. Now, the biggest part was we worked with the government, the safety. So the first thing we did, we worked with the government, and we looked at the government's cleaning restrictions and how they wanted us to clean. So the government, in fact, visited us. We showed them our cleaning tools that we have. We asked them for the chemicals. We made sure we got the right chemicals that the government wanted. The government worked with us. They showed us how to do a cleaning, and we still do those cleanings now every night. It's something that we worked, and the government come and do checks. But what we found most important in the OPAP period was to make sure that we worked with the government. They understood everything that we did, and we had daily communication, which we do through telephone, but also what is very big in China is WeChat, and we have WeChat groups with the government, plus other attractions that we can, you know, if government has an update or the Tourism Bureau, part of the government has an update, go on and move on things very, very quickly. So the precautions that we put into opening Lost Chambers, it's indoor, and it's also in part of our avenues, which is an area with the restaurants and a retail area. So basically, people would have to come into our car park. Coming into our car park, they would have a check for temperature. Then when they came into the avenue section, they'd have a check for temperature. Then when they came to the aquarium, again, they'd have a temperature check, but also what was mentioned before was a QR code. So what has been set up in China is what is called a green code. And everyone must have this green code on their phone, and daily we have to update our green code. So the questions that you have to ask is, have you traveled to certain regions? Are you coughing? Do you have temperature? And there's you have to daily put this in, and then you get this green code. So people need the green code plus temperature checks. We also had to look at distancing from the initial queue. So we had to do our distancing. The easiest way was marking everything on the ground. Then also, as it's indoor, everyone must have a face mask. So that's how we've been operating. Now, opening up the aquarium, as anyone in this game understands, our largest cost is running the aquarium, which even during the lockdown, of course, we had to have our staff to feed the animals, maintain, we had cleaning, we had filtration running. So in fact, to open the aquarium, we only really had to put on 6 more staff. So normally the aquarium would run at 12 hours, but we've only been operating it at 8 hours, so we can run it off shifts to look after our staff costs and keep our costs down. We've basically been running at 30 to 40% of what we should be at this time of year. So that's why it's very important to look at our operating costs. But what is most important is we are running at a profit. The next ramp up, the next startup was the Waterpark. Now the Waterpark was a whole new ball game because, as I said, aquarium we already had operating costs. The Waterpark was down. I think what was most important during the down period, we kept a lot of staff busy on doing a maintenance program. So we used that time because it's a water park that runs 365 days a year. So in all honesty, it was nice to have a down period because we never do get a down period. So again, we did that as cost effectively as we could. So we didn't work with outside contractors. We used our staff. So we worked with our facilities team, plus then we got our operations team, such as lifeguards, to assist, and where we looked at retiling, repainting, and we went through the whole facility to clean it up, which was good for the park. And 2, it allowed us to keep our staff employed and our staff still working during that period. So we use that time as a positive instead of a negative. Turning into opening, the water park has been difficult. My understanding is many attractions opened in China and closed within a week. And the reason is they were losing way too much money. So it was not financially smart to be open. So what we had to look is we basically broke down every attraction to operating every hour, from staffing costs to utilities, to chemicals, to cleaners, into food. We looked at every cost, and basically we broke down an hour by cost. And what we looked at is how to best rotate the rides throughout our attraction. So, because the reality is, with the numbers that are here and the movement and the tourism that we have, if we fully open the water park, we would be losing money. So what we've done is we put in a program, and we basically now are operating the water park at 40% cost of what we would normally do during a full operation. We only have one attraction closed, which is a major river, which is a 2-kilometre river, which has a very high operating cost in labour and in utilities. So that has been closed. So therefore, our admission price has been discounted because we're not fully open. Then we've been very, very strategic in the way that we rotate rides. So we've looked at the attractions. So basically, one ride is never closed for more than an hour. It'll open up again in an hour. And we found that to be very efficient. And we've looked at how guests flow through the park. So therefore, guests can enjoy every attraction during the day, except for the river that was mentioned, which they feel is value for money. What we've looked at is what suits the guest, what makes them happy, not what's easy as us as operators. I have seen parks that try to rotate, and they operate half the park for 4 hours and the other half of the park for 4 hours. But the problem there is you find the guests will enjoy the rides, go through the rides, finish in 1.5 to 2 hours. Then what do I do for 2 hours? And then they complain. So that's why the 1 hour rotation has been very, very important to us. Again, everyone must have a QR code. Everyone must, we check temperatures. Again, it's a water park. Face mask is not a reality on rides. But the current law in Hainan is people must wear face masks indoors. Outdoors, they must have a face mask ready. So basically, what we find is people are wearing their face masks while walking from ride to ride. Then also we find that they take them off for the ride. And then they come back off the ride and put on their face mask again. So I think it was a very good point brought up by Oliver before. We're finding the water park is doing much, much higher numbers than the aquarium. And the reason is because it's an outdoor, people feel safer because it's outdoor. And we feel one of the reasons we said people come into Hainan because it's a tropical area, it's outdoor, people feel it's a lot fresh, a lot more cleaner. And that's why we do find people coming here. So we've had a very successful reopening because we've been very strategic in what we're doing. We are finding that during the week, as an example for the water park, we're doing 1,500 a day, and we've had up to 3,000 on days, which for this time of year is very, very strong. But as I mentioned, we do have a lower entrance price, which again is keeping our revenue down. So again, we're probably at about 40% of revenue, but our attendances are probably at about 60-65% of what they would be at this time of year, because we're running with lower operations and we're doing discounted prices, which affects our revenues overall. But what our overall strategy is 2 issues. One is we want to make sure that we're profitable, and 2, that we keep all staff. So we're constantly in contact with our staff. Everyone, the maximum working is, even senior management, is 80%. So no one is working a full salary, 100%. 80% is the maximum. So from top level right down, we're making sure that everyone is working towards this goal. And what we're finding, we believe that if we can get through this period and we can keep making money, there is no need for the owners to come back and make us to put in a strategy that we need to lose staff. So staff understand that it's tough times, but We have WeChat. When we were in full lockdown, we have a work WeChat that we could do something very similar to what we're doing now, and all work could come in and listen, and we talk to the staff and deliver messages of where we're at, how we're moving forward, and how we're going to work together to get through this. And everyone understands that the reasons that they're taking cuts now is that we can keep everyone employed, and that's the way that we want to come out of this, make sure that everyone is employed. And also, as we go back into some stronger trading in the future that we believe will happen later on in the year, is that we'll have all staff in place and our trained staff who are able to take the facility forward at the high standards that we request and require.
Thank you so much, Alan. That is such practical advice, and really interesting to hear about how you've been working with government and the industry around you, and the decisions on how you're operating that cost and safety base, and how that translates into your staff and pricing. So thank you so much. June, as we dive deeper into this operational measures topic, could you walk us through what is the emerging best practice in the region for operational processes and technologies, and the expectations for staff and visitors?
Thanks, Angie. Of course, I think we got a lot of really good information from Alan being open right now after having been closed after COVID-19. With IAAPA, I think a lot of our members have come together to put together best practices or an operational consideration page. It's consisted of quite a few pages, which we'll likely upload onto our website in the next couple of days. And it's put together by a lot of operators in the region operating different kinds of attractions, and it goes through some of the practices such as wearing masks. And I think it really depends on, when we go into this kind of discussion, what are the best operating procedures and what are we supposed to be doing when we open an attraction. I think it's really dependent on where you are. Because the government restrictions or government regulations are going to be very different in different countries. And obviously what Alan faces in China and in Sanya is going to be very different to something that is going to be another attraction that is going to be in Mexico or in the US. So I think first and foremost, you really need to consider what the government is really requiring and allowing you to do. But generally, we do see a lot of attractions now debating whether we need the, the temperature scans at the entrance, how long the temperature scans are going to be, and whether it affects the operational day, because you're spending a lot of time sanitizing and also looking at a lot of the different areas where you need to take temperature checks and kind of pause some of the attractions. So I think it's really important to really look at, again, when Alan mentioned looking at your operational costs and looking at how you really minimize your costs, but be able to put some things in place that allow the consumer confidence to come back again. When we look at some of the other operation procedures that I've seen, isolating persons that you at the gate, if you do see someone with symptoms of being unwell, obviously you'd need an area of isolation. You'd need somewhere to put that person and to be able to contact a local authority to be able to take care of that. Reviewing some of your first aid support, having masks available to your guests if it's possible to make them available, encouraging your guests to buy tickets online, having that system ready and up and running. I know some of our smaller attractions might not have very, very complex online systems for purchase, but it is something that our members have thought that consideration really does need to come into place. Building confidence with the guests have been really, really important within the region. I think within the last couple of weeks, we've really seen, or couple of months, we've seen some of our attractions really look at how to engage the guests before they come back. How do we have that confidence back before they're back into the attraction? And a lot of the attractions I've seen, I've been doing a lot of research online. They've been doing cleaning videos, they've been doing maintenance videos, showing the back of house, showing how they're taking care of their animals or taking care of their theme parks or their rides, to ensure that you regain that consumer confidence with the visitors that you're going to be getting. Hopefully by summer, when most of the virus subsides, you'll be getting a very big uptick of visitation. And from our experience with SARS, we did see a very steep uptick of visitation right after about the June timeframe when SARS was really dying down. So I think I'm going to stop here and let Angie take it away.
Thank you so much, Joan. It's a really interesting look to build on where Alan took us in terms of the ramp up itself. So I just wanted to move on to talk about sentiment and in lots of different aspects. I think sentiment of the general public and their perception of visitor attractions and public spaces, sentiment of staff and their confidence in coming to the workplace, and then sentiment of visitors themselves. And I'll pose this question out to the group of whoever wants to jump in first there. What is the general feeling of the visiting public here? Are they fearless or fearful of public interaction? Are there any particular places or types of experiences that stand out in terms of that feeling?
Maybe I can go first on that, Angie. I mean, look, the numbers certainly for the indoor attractions. I mean, it was good to hear that Atlantis has been relatively busy. That's very positive. But the numbers for the indoor attractions have suggested that there's still, there's still quite a lot of concern from people. I also read a good Oliver Wyman study yesterday. That's the management consultants. That people are still fearful about another wave of the pandemic coming into. I'm talking about China, since that's one of the market that's recently reopened, and there's a significant reduction of people of their travel plans. So internationally, of course, a significant reduction, but even domestically, there's a bit of a reduction as well. And in terms of how people are traveling, that's also changed. So there's a big increase in intention of using their own cars as opposed to public transport. So there are some pretty big changes in terms of how people are intending to visit, and that all sort of links in with the general sentiment of the market. So then there are a couple of other sort of key factors, I think, that impact this. One is spending. I think some people have been hit financially. They may have lost a bonus they were expecting, or they may have had to take a temporary salary reduction, or possibly enforced annual leave with no pay. There have been quite a few measures put in place. One thing that was interesting to hear from Alan was that so far, I'm not seeing so many redundancies across the attractions industry. That's positive, and that may be dependent on how long this lasts for. I'm currently working with Samuels and Company, who are a US agent consultancy for similar to what Scallywag does in this region, and we have found that across the respondees so far to a survey we are conducting, that actually so far there are not many redundancies. So that's positive, at least for now. However, there are a lot of other measures that are being put in place that are impacting people's salaries. And I think that's probably across the rest of the market as well, not just in the attractions industry. So people have been hit financially, and I think that may impact how they visit attractions as well in the short to medium term. Having said that, on the flip side, in the Oliver Wyman study, most of the people interviewed had said that they are keen to get out and go to do things with the family, and particularly to local experiences, local attractions, F&B, restaurants. There is definitely a keenness to do that. So whilst it may impact the amount of travel that people are doing, even within China, between cities, I think in the medium term, there should start, as people grow their confidence in the market and in the situation with whether there's going to be a second or third wave, hopefully we will start to see a significant increase in people starting to go to restaurants and visitor attractions as well.
To touch base here, I think definitely the confidence. I think, as June mentioned, one of the reasons we wanted to open is to get confidence back in the market. But there is no doubt that your customer base is very, very different in attitude. You can tell when they look at the eyes, the way people look at each other, the way people look at you. When the people are not getting close, people keeping distances no matter what. When we talk, I saw some questions come out about food and beverage. In our restaurants, within our resort, we've really looked at the way that we do seating. What I didn't touch on before, which we talked about face masks, our biggest issue, our number one thing is hand sanitizer. And we have hand sanitizer everywhere. Even throughout the aquarium, throughout the water park, we have hand sanitizer stations everywhere. And in the restaurants, what we tend to do is we've given a lot more space for tables. And as soon as people sit down, we walk up and we offer hand sanitizer. But we want to try to make people relax and feel relaxed because yeah, you have the feeling that people are not as relaxed as they were 6 months ago in a resort where they're happy to stand close in lines. Normally in China, their personal space is not that important, as you could see in that picture before. But now there's definitely a notice of personal space. In elevators, you feel it. You feel that people look and they go into the four corners of the elevator. But in Lost Chambers, which is an indoor attraction, definitely, you see if people see someone walking ahead of them, they will slow down and let those people walk ahead of them. Or they'll stay at one small attraction longer because there's not as many people. You do see that the feeling is not what it always is.
June, how about for yourself? Are you hearing any other comments or sentiments on the market?
So I think, again, I think it really varies from country to country. I think for, especially when closer to home, for Hong Kong, we've kind of been through, working from home since the protests. We've been through SARS in 2003. So for us, it's a little bit different. I think we do take our personal space very seriously, so people do distance ourselves normally. But I think we're living in very small cities, like very tight cities. So I think that the sentiment is the same across the board. You would want to have a bit of a distance between other people. But when I look back at after SARS in 03, there's just that need for people to be connected again, to be part of a community and to be with each other. Of course, at this moment, I think we're still at very early stages. We're still not seeing the reopening of attractions or outside locations, but I think soon enough, we will see that this will subside and people will want to get together again and will want to be connected with each other again. And that's why when we look at some of the studies, people will, I've also seen a few studies where, people are not willing to really gather in large crowds within the next half a year or so. But we also see studies from the travel sector, from the airline sector, where they're not looking at being able to increase pricing or anything like that to reflect the lower demand, because they see that people will want to be traveling in the next after that 6-month period or further on. So I think people will regain that confidence and will want to be part of a community and be closer again, but it will take a little bit of time and it will be very different from different countries. Just to quickly touch on, I saw a question from Randy, one of our IAAPA members, about reopening in one state versus another and how it will look like for US. I can't say anything for the US, of course, but when we look at China, that's exactly the sample of the one city opened, and it's right next to me, and my city hasn't opened up fully yet. And I think as we see one location open or one city open up, you will see that will translate well with the other cities if it's able to be contained very well. If you see the confidence in people because they see lower cases, they don't see a huge uptick of cases. If it's a controlled opening of the cities, I think it does gain confidence. The only other side of the coin is if you open up travel restrictions or you open up a city and a lot of cases rise up, then I think that really does put a pause on some of the consumer sentiment on that. Thanks, Angie.
And June, just to jump in there as well. I mean, the interesting feedback that I'm getting from different attraction companies is there seems to be quite a lot of inconsistency in terms of the government policies and how it's being applied in different locations, different cities. So obviously Shanghai has forced the reclosure of most attractions. I think most government indoor attractions still remain closed. So that's some of the large museums and things like that. And also attractions that have been allowed to reopen, they have had restrictions placed on them intermittently, it seems, in terms of the number of visitors they are allowed. So I've heard two numbers thrown around. From one company, they said they've been told they're only allowed to allow up to 50% of their normal capacity. They've said that they're not going to reach that for a few months, so they're not too concerned about that right now. But I've heard from another company it's 30%. So there do seem to be a few different numbers flying around, communicated from different government departments and so on. So I think we're likely to see some level of inconsistency in other countries as well, in terms of how policies are applied in terms of restrictions. So that's a challenging dynamic of the China market that we're seeing as well.
I absolutely agree, and that's what we've seen in, I sent a couple of my team over to Shanghai Haichang Ocean Park, really out in the rural areas of Shanghai. It opened 2 days ago, and they are restricted at the 50% capacity. And I think it's reasonable to say that, each city or each location, at least each province will be restricted differently, because the population amount is also different in each province. And the city concentration is definitely very different in each area too. So I think it will be a little bit, sometimes it does seem a little bit confusing, but I think reasonably said, each city, it has very different concentrations of population, and it's going to affect how they reopen and how much is allowed to reopen.
Thank you so much. And Ellen, any other thoughts before we move on to some general Q&A?
Yeah, and that's exactly what June said. Every place is different. We're at 30% of our capacity from the government has passed on. So again, the most important is working with the government, understanding your local government. And I try to not listen to what's happening around China and just work with our government and have a good relationship there.
Yeah, it sounds like that's going to be important for everyone everywhere, in both city and particularly state and national governments. Ellen, if we stay with you, I had a couple of questions that have come in on the practicalities, and I know you've talked a little bit about masks and temperature checks. Could you talk us through a bit more around this? Is it common for people to be provided with a mask if they don't have one? Do they come with their own? And with temperature checks, how do you decide who you're turning away? How does that sort of interaction work for you?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, the mask, we're lucky in China. People have no hesitation to wear masks. As I saw, everything spreading globally, and as an Australian, I was watching a lot of Australian news. I was quite amazed when a footballer was being interviewed and the people on that show were laughing at him for wearing a mask. It's almost like ridiculed. It's like in the West, it's, I don't wear a mask, it's a stupid thing to do. In China, everyone wears a mask. There's laws, so we do not have anyone turn up without a mask, at least in their pocket, in their bag. So we haven't had a situation where we've had to look to give someone one. We looked at selling masks for a while, but that only caused problems. Because we're a high-end resort, we have retail shops, we have staffing costs, so our cost of masks was was more than what it is outside in the marketplace. So we got criticism that our masks were too expensive. So we in fact don't sell them, don't hand them out, and again, I'd say we're lucky in China that people turn up with masks. So that's that's quite good there. We
Just
talked about
Alan,
last
just while we're on masks, Alan, there's an interesting dynamic that I looked at the other day, which is staff. I mean, if staff, presumably your staff were presumably wearing masks, obviously the one of the key elements of a visitor experience is the interaction with the staff and being able to talk, and the smiles of the staff is very important. You know, the mask takes away a lot of that experience. I have seen some interesting developments in mask manufacturing, and there are masks that have been designed for hard of hearing, people who are hard of hearing, for lip reading, so that they're actually transparent, you can see through them. I think it'll be interesting to see whether that line of manufacturing becomes more prevalent. I think being able to, even if there's a mask between you, but being able to see the smile and expression of someone's face could make a significant difference to the interaction with staff. So I think that'll be an interesting kind of trend that we might see happening over the next 6 months as those manufacturers are able to start supplying service industries as opposed to only supplying hospitals, which is the case at the moment.
I think to go into the staff issue, we supply all staff with masks. We do that ourselves. Every staff has a new mask every day, and all staff must wear masks at all times, especially when in close proximity to guests. Temperature checks. Now we really don't have anyone who is failing temperature checks, but if you want to go back into the earlier days, we submitted temperature checks throughout the resort very, very quickly, and that's how anyone who had a high temperature, we then had a special area. We took them aside, we called the government, and the government came into testing, and then those people at that time were taken off to hospital and were given tests at the hospital. So it was something that we had to take very seriously, and any temperature over is reported to the government. So yes, what was said, we have a certain area, we take people to that area, our security becomes involved, and we contact the government, and the government comes very quickly.
Thank you so much, Alan. And just one more, and then I will pose to the speakers just their last pieces of parting advice. What about touch surfaces? We've got a lot of questions coming in about that, around cleaning procedures, around touch habitats, Alan, and the aquarium. What's the story there with those highly touchable surfaces and rides and so forth?
We have a cleaning program on anything from elevator, buttons, yes. We don't have too many touch games in our aquarium, to be honest, but anything that is touched our elevators are currently cleaned every 15 minutes. So we have cleaners who are on a set going around. So yeah, we're looking at touch areas, door handles, into certain areas where people going in and out of doors, and we're cleaning every 15 minutes. Again, as I said, we met with the government. Why we did this is we wanted to make sure if anything happened that what we find important is the government approves everything we're using. So we don't just go and purchase something, we talk to the government, what should we purchase, what chemicals should we use, and we use them. So we're always in lines with the government, which is a safety measure that the government can never come back at us, because we've worked with the government. It's always, I think in normal work, if it's, you pass on your responsibility to your next senior, and then it's not your responsibility. So that's why we want to work with the government. One, to make sure we're doing the right thing, but also to take the responsibility off our shoulders and again, put that back onto the government's shoulders. So we never make a decision, or we never use anything without approval of the government and their recommendations.
That's a really good point.
And they know our cleaning program. So we work with the government. So we looked at certain areas. So before opening, we had the government, we walked around and we looked at the doors that are being touched. We looked at elevator buttons, anything being touched. We put a cleaning program together with the government. And of course, those cleaners sign every 15 minutes, that they sign where they're going throughout the day. So we have a strong record that we've been cleaning the areas that we agreed to do with the government.
Thank you. So just very quickly to finish, I just wanted to run through, June, perhaps you can start us off. What advice would you give to attractions in other markets who are now thinking about reopening and things that they should prioritize to do now?
I think the first priority really is to look at the future, look at tomorrow. I mean, where I see a lot of US based attendees online, and I can say today is Friday and it's looking to be a beautiful day here. And I'm seeing in the future for you, just in case you're wondering. So I really want to say that it's really important to keep that positivity, to really think about what are we going to do in the future, not to overburn yourself, because I know a lot of people tend to, in crisis situations, think they need to do more because they're at home or need to do extra. But really, when you look at the future, and we've seen different crises, the world has seen different crises before. Different crises may have hit certain areas a little bit more severely, but and this is certainly something that the world has never seen at such a global scale since a lot of us have been alive. But I think it's really important to look at the future and look at what you're going to plan, and look at now how you're going to gain that confidence back from the visitation, from the attendees, because you cannot leave the attendees and the future visitors without that personal touch. So keep positive and keep that personal touch, and have your team also engage in something that they're good at. You might actually find out that there are some team members that are on your team that have a really great experience using Facebook videos or Facebook Live that can really engage your visitors a lot. So keep cheerful.
Thank you. That's very, very important advice. Oliver, how about for you?
So I think sort of similar to what one of the elements June was saying, I think you focus on what you can control. There's a lot of stuff at the moment that's out of our control. And if we focus on what we can control, and that's probably the cleaning and sanitization measures, and communicating to your guests what you're doing to keep them safe and keep your staff safe and so on. So I think to really focus on that, I think that's helpful. I think from the various research reports I've seen, a focus on local market, local residents initially makes sense. I think international travel is going to be quite restricted for some time. So to focus in on the local residential market, to try and get them back into the attractions would be a sensible approach. And then finally, I mentioned those masks. I don't think they're necessarily available right now, but maybe as an interim solution, you could have your staff wear a badge with a picture of them smiling. Then customers can see what they normally look like, and that they are a happy person. They're not just not a person behind a mask. So that's my final suggestion.
Thank you. And Ellen, from you?
Yeah, I fully support June, and if we can encourage anything, I look back to the 22nd of January, and and during that time, it's a period I'll never forget. It was scary. It was, I can't explain it. You didn't want to go near people. We had a full resort that the numbers slowly went down, but there was people around, and it felt like a bad dream. Is all that I can experience. So, I'm in a lucky situation that, again, it's a beautiful day here. I finish this, I can go surfing, I can get out, do some things. Life will move on, and it's best to stay strong and positive. What we looked at was, of course, our guest safety, but we also concentrated on our staff. And we had two goals. We wanted to ensure that no staff got the virus, and no staff has got the virus till today. Secondly, we wanted to ensure that we can keep our staff employed. Till today, we still have not we've not put off any staff. So they're two big goals, and we've worked with our staff to keep our staff positive, because I think it's important that we look after our staff moving forward, not just ourselves. We're a family here, and our staff is a family. So we worked together as a family and kept happy. And I think communication with our staff during this whole period, being positive. As I said, we did links to the staff to show them good things that are happening, updating, giving them good stories. We gave people awards, did the right things, such as the staff who dealt with the first customers with the virus and looked after them and took them to hospitals, to our facilities team who worked through this period, you know, to do that facilities work. So we awarded that department with an award. So, you know, we've wanted to keep our staff positive and ourselves positive. So I think being positive, looking at moving forward is the best way to go.
Thank you so much, Alan, and that focus on people is so admirable. As we wrap up today, if you haven't got your copy already, head to resources.dexibit.com for our Survive and Thrive white paper for visitor attractions responding to COVID-19. It is free to download. And Oliver, I believe you'll share a link to your survey on social media as well, so that people can participate in that and receive the results. Even in Asia, these are still early days of how this crisis looks post-lockdown, and there's a lot of rebuilding to occur, a lot of the situations still to unfold. In our own regions, as we think about reopening and emerging from lockdown, I think we're all reminded of that famous Churchill quote doing the rounds at the moment, that this is not the end, it's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. We'll be distributing slides and a recording from today via email following this session. You can check out these and more online at covid.dexibit.com. To our speakers, thank you so much for all your wisdom and advice and sharing your experience with us all. And to everyone out there listening today, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay home, stay well, and see you next time. Mā te wā.